Shalom. Good. Just watching to see if you're listening. That's good. Please.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us here and honoring us as we close this very successful GA. Before we start, though, I'd like to belatedly wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you.
I know a couple days ago was your birthday.
Thank you.
We wish you continued good health.
Well, in my age, you stop counting, you know.
So,
You still celebrate.
so
Does anybody share that here? Yeah? Okay.
we all share that here. So,
Thank you.
so talking about a little bit of your background and your biography, I was just wondering, when you were back in high school or college, did you ever imagine someday you would be the Prime Minister of Israel? And can you share with us a little bit of the path from that time to what got you here?
No, I had absolutely no idea, and no ambition either. I mean, I got into this. I was always involved with the country. I spent 5 years in our special unit, Sayeret Matkal, fighting for the country, but I had no intention of leading the country, and I wasn't particularly involved in politics. In history, I studied a lot, but I never thought of pursuing a political career. The way I got into it was after my brother died at Entebbe, leading the rescue mission there. I decided that the problem of terrorism was not, in the first instance, you think it's military, but I thought it was political, because it was driven by states that were basically using terrorism as a weapon against the West. At the time, it was the Soviet bloc and the Arab bloc, and so I thought that what should be done was a moral and political battle against terrorism. And after my brother's death, I started a foundation named the Jonathan Institute to bring these ideas, a term that we coined, state-sponsored terrorism. You will not find it before the activities that we launched. And the moral battle against terrorism, this nonsense that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I decided you can define terrorism. It's the systematic and deliberate attack on innocent civilians, on combatants for political or ideological ends. And putting forth these concepts, I thought to make international conferences of great leaders and great thinkers. And the first one I did was in Jerusalem, and my brother died in 1976. And in 1979, I arranged a conference of the Jonathan Institute on international terrorism. And they had all sorts of people there, like Senator Henry Jackson, and at the time the leading candidate for president, George Bush Sr. My father said, my late father, he said, bring Reagan. I said, why? He's an actor. He said, bring Reagan. Youth triumphed over wisdom. But it turns out George Bush Sr. also became president. In any case, a lot of people, Misha Arentz was in that conference, as were many, many other people, and he was very much impressed by its impact on international discourse. So when he was appointed ambassador to Washington a few years later in 1982, he said, who's the guy who organized that conference? That's the guy I want as my number 2 in Washington. He called me, he asked me, would you come? And I said, well, I'll think about it. I did. For 30 seconds, I said yes. And I went in as his number 2, and from there, I was launched into the field of public diplomacy. From there, I went to the UN, and, from there you stray from the, from private life into public life, and that's how I'm here.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned a number of the presidents that were at your conference that became President of the United States, and Reagan, who wasn't there, but I'm wondering, in all the years you've been doing this, how have you seen the relationship between our two countries, between Israel and the United States, evolve? And what concerns you most, if anything, about that relationship today?
There's no question it's gotten a lot stronger. First of all, there's an objective criteria. It doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot. And that is a tracking poll that Gallup does every year. They ask the same question, Same time, each year, same question. The question is, who do you support? What is your opinion of Israel? What is your opinion of the Palestinian Authority? And it's always shocking because people are sure that they understand where America is. We understand the problem in the college campuses. We understand the, the ultra-left appearance. Everybody understands that. But when you look at the numbers, they're quite startling. Because what this shows you is that the support for the Palestinian is flat. It's like flat, 18%. Doesn't move. I'm talking about the last 20 years, okay? Flat. It's like the EKG of a dead man, flat, okay? But when you look at Israel, it goes from about 47 to 72. I mean, it keeps on going, and it's a very constant increase. And if you project it back to the Six-Day War, what do you think it was after the end of the Six-Day War? 100 right now. It was about 35%. So basically, the support for Israel has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger consistently as Americans view Israel as a kind of America, something kindred society, basically a democracy in the heart of the Middle East, representing common values of freedom and democracy. It's a very strong identification, despite the all the problems and all the criticisms that are leveled in Israel. The vast majority of Americans view Israel amazingly favorably and very much as an extension of our common civilization. That's the good news. The bad news is the strengthening on the 18%. You have, you have greater intensity there. There's greater intensity on the positives. And we know all the, the feelings that so many Americans in the hinterland have for Israel, but there's also greater intensity, which is typically the source of our discussion, as though that reflects the entire reality. It doesn't. I have my own indication. I don't need Gallup, You want to hear how I know? Okay. So I'm a very, I'm at once a very passionate person, but I'm also a very clinical person, okay? I'm a very clinical person. This is from family traditions. All right. So here's the way I test it. I come to New York every year for the General Assembly, right? Okay. And after I do the speech, two things happen. One, with the exception of this year's, there's always Matthew Sullivan. He's the security UN. 6'6" policeman, and every year he tells me, you did better. Last year was better, this year is better. So I get a pretty good indication of the speech. But the other thing I do is after the speech, we go walk around in New York. We walk to Central Park, my wife and I. You can get a pretty good feeling, not only of what is happening in America, but what is happening in many other countries that visit. But I thought that's too easy. Now, another time we went to Washington, Veterans Day, I thought I'd go to the ultimate veteran. The ultimate veteran is George Washington. I went to Mount Vernon. Everybody's happy, because in New York you'd say, well, they're Jews. And in Mount Vernon, there weren't that many, okay? They came from all, and they're all very happy. So that's not an indicator. So I decided I'm going to improve the test. And I'll go down to the lower, the southern part of New York to a book store called The Strand. You been there? Now, what do you think was the reaction there? Free Palestine, right? Yep, one woman outside the store. What do you think the thing was inside? Now, here's the last one, okay? After that, ask me questions, I'll try to be brief, but I enjoy sharing this with you. I gotta tell you this, you never hear about this. Well, my wife and I went to a play called Hamilton. Yeah, okay. All right. How did I get tickets? Because my cousin's wife works in the production. That's how. That's how I got the tickets. Okay. So I got the tickets. Okay. Now I tell the security people, so honest to goodness, this is the story. I tell the security people, look, the one thing is I don't want to be late. I don't want to be late. I don't want to come in there and they'll stop, for all these security things. I don't want to be late. I want to be on time. So, Prime Minister, no problem. Okay. We leave, like 25 minutes before, and we're late. And I'm very angry. And they said, well, the Americans don't run the red lights the way we do, so we didn't compute time. Now we come in, and I'm saying to Sarah, this is horrible, you know, we're going to be late. And look at what will happen, we'll disrupt things, and you know, as we walk in, and the lights are still on, because I think, you know, because I interrupted it, and there's a big applause, and I see, you see, the actors are coming out now, and she said, no, dummy, it's for you. So 1,300 people stand up, and they clap, and so on, and you know, and that's that. They start the play. It was very nice. I enjoyed it very much. Talked to the actors in the intermission. Asked them if they knew what Hamilton said about the Jewish people. Did you hear? You know what he said?
Sure.
What Hamilton said about he said the Jewish people, the fact that the Jewish people have survived and still cling to their ideal is a testament to God and to their eternity. And he was amazingly, he could say the Seret HaDibot, the 10 Commandments in Hebrew. Did you know that? Yeah, he didn't know that. I'll bet the guy who wrote the play didn't know that either, but I wrote him a letter, and I said, why don't you put that in? What he said about the Jews. He learned Hebrew from a Sephardi governess that helped raise him in the Caribbean island in St. Nevis, where he was. You didn't know that, right? Yeah, okay, well, all right, okay. Anyway, I knew that. I told it to the actors, but I didn't see the Hebrew line appear, okay. So now we finished the play. They stood up, and it was very nice. We couldn't get out of there because people were very excited. And the next day, I see in the Israeli press, Netanyahu booed at Hamilton. I said, what? What's going on here? And so it happened that one of the people, many of the people there took, you know, they have cell phones these days, so they took it. And they gave it to my press guy. Immediately I said, Netanyahu booed, and here's, you know, the video, you know, here's the streaming from that. And I wanted to make a point about the accuracy of the press. You know, I'm a little more subtle on this point than some. But it's the same point. It's the same point. Netanyahu booed. A woman in the back, one of 1,300, said, free Palestine. We couldn't hear her. Okay? So here's my take. I think that there is exactly what I said before. I think there's a hardening in the 18%, and I think there's a continuous line on the 70-something%. And most Americans identify with Israel. This means we have, though, a job to sustain it and to keep it going. It means Hispanics, it means the black community, it means young people in the campuses, it means fighting back, all the things that we fight. And it means bringing as many young people as we can here, young Jews, Birthright, Taglit, Masa, all these programs that we have to work together on a big, because it's not guaranteed, but it's not all rosy, but it ain't as bad as you think it is. And that's, by the way, a general rule in life, you know. Things are never as good as you think, and they're never as bad as you think. They're somewhere in the middle. Make sure they never go down. That's important. That's my answer.
Okay.
What has happened in the relationship has been expressed in two things. First, I had some differences with the previous administration on Iran, but on a few other things, but primarily on Iran. And yet that didn't prevent, because of the strength of this bond between Israel and the United States, it didn't prevent me from signing a deal with President Obama for $38 billion for the next installment of Israel's security assistance, and I attached great importance to that. I thought that was very important. I have to say that the differences of opinion on Iran and most things did not materialize in the incoming administration. President Trump has been an unabashed supporter of Israel on this issue as well, and so many other issues. And he moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Jerusalem. He did something unbelievable. This was something that we had dreamed about from the founding of the State of Israel, and President Trump did it. He gives us enormous support. And so I would say the state of American, by the way, security and intelligence, in ways that are unparalleled. And I wish I could discuss here, but I can't, and it's true. So I would say the state of Israeli-American relationship, the alliance, has never been stronger. And we have to make sure that it continues to be that way. And that's our job, your job too.
Thank you. Well, we're also very privileged today that the occupant of the embassy here in Jerusalem is sitting right here in the front row. And Ambassador...
Get up, David. Let's see it.
He spoke to us a few minutes ago. Okay. And one of the things that he spoke about, Mr. Prime Minister, that we've been talking about the last couple of days are all the things we have in common, all the things unite us. But we're having very frank discussions on some of the issues that concern many North American Jews. And I'm sure you're aware, as I am, that we have a number of concerns about pluralism, acceptance of Reform and conservative Jews here in Israel. The nation-state law raised questions in some minds with respect to democracy. So let me ask you this. Should we be concerned? Are we missing something? And where do we have it right?
No, I don't think you should be concerned, but I think you should be informed. Then you make up your mind, because so much of this is based on, I think, on, let me be charitable, on misinformation, okay? So let me say first this. From day one, Israel was a parliamentary system, and even though I defined it as a Jewish state, Herzl defined it as a Jewish state, as the nation state of the Jewish people. Why are we here? We're only here because of that. Otherwise, we'd be in Denmark, or I'm the foreign minister, I better be careful. But we'd be anywhere. Why are we here? This is the nation state of the Jewish people, the one and only Jewish state in the world, where Jews can live anywhere in the world, should have the freedom to live freely and without fear. But the one place where any Jew can come and migrate automatically is the Jewish state. That was the whole idea of the Jewish state, which is a small pamphlet that was published roughly 120 years ago and changed history. Changed our history, but changed world history too. So that's very clear. When the Jewish state was established, it was established as a parliamentary democracy. And soon after it was established, the first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, had a problem, because there was the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox minority that wanted a halakhic state, and there was a secular majority that didn't want it. But he couldn't form a government, which has been the case for everyone since. And so he had to strike. What did he do? He said, these are two conflicting principles. And you can't resolve it with a unifying principle. You resolve it by a series of ad hoc compromises. And they evolve over time. Okay? Example. The secular people want cinema on Shabbat. And the religious minority, the last thing they want is cinema. In fact, they don't want transportation in their own communities in Shabbat. So what do? Well, in religious communities, you don't have transportation in Shabbat. You actually don't have it. And in the secular communities, you have cinematheques, okay, or whatever, okay. That's the kind of thing that Israel has done systematically. And from time to time, the status quo is challenged. It changes, it doesn't evolve like this. It evolves in step functions. That's, by the way, most of human progress until recently has been step functions. You sort of settle on a status quo, it goes up to a certain point, then it changes. I'm not sure that's true in our economy and in our society because of the force of technology. But this is what happened in Israel. So we had a series of evolving understandings, evolving compromises. One of the challenges that we got, and the strongest challenges, came from basically court challenges from the United States, from the American Jewish community, Reform. I think it's primarily Reform, also conservative. On the question, the first question that I got when I came into the Prime Minister's office was the question of giyur, of conversion. Thank you, my English has been eroding. Okay. Giyur, Reform, what to do? It's exactly the same question. And I thought of, well, you know, what would Ben-Gurion do? He'd find a compromise. And I found a compromise with a brilliant minister that I had at the time, Yaakov Ne'eman, the late Yaakov Ne'eman. It's called the Ne'eman Commission. And we created a structure that overcame the question of, will the rabbinate do this? Will Reform rabbis do this? And we found an ingenious way to do it. It's survived for 20 years. It's now being challenged again. I got another very brilliant guy, a former justice minister also, who's Moshe Nissim. He wrote a report, smacked on the side of the Orthodox, smacked on the side of the, I think it's a good one. It's a good compromise, but I don't know if I have the ability right now to pass it because it's hard. It depends on the political realities, but an interesting thing. And then the question of the wall came up, okay? For 20 years, we've had a wall. We've had a plaza, not a plaza, but a piece of the wall in the south that is basically open to everyone, which is what I would like. I want Israel to be the home of every Jew and for every Jew to feel comfortable there. That was challenged again in court, and we were into, I worked for, I don't know, maybe 2 years on a compromise, again, a compromise, which would open a new plaza, refurbish the place where people have been praying for the last 20 years, and make it accessible in an uplifted way. We had the technical drawings, the whole thing. And part of that had explanatory notes when I brought it to the government, which would imply an indirect recognition in Israel of the conservative and reform terms. And that was okay, people agreed. Then it was challenged immediately by the ultra-Orthodox street, and they basically said, you know, choose, you know, can have a government, no government. People don't bring down government so quickly, neither does the opposition. Every time we say the opposition will do it differently, one of the Orthodox Knesset members takes out the the note, little note that was given to him by the current head of the opposition with offers that exceed the ones given by Likud. We will, so this is the reality here. Anyway, so rather than cancel this agreement because of this explanatory note, I'm telling this exactly as it is, okay? I said, no, we're not going to cancel it. We're just going to suspend it. Keep it there. Don't cancel it. But move with what the agreement actually says you do, which is refurbish the plaza. They started working on it, you have to have archaeological digs there. We're doing that. You have to have security digs. Did you see that stone that fell? Yeah? Okay. Stone that was catapulted out of the wall. I'll bet people have theological explanations for that. Anyway, we have to put it back in. We're working on that. In fact, the work on that started yesterday. This should speed up the conclusion, and I expect the plaza to be completed. We finished nearly all the regulatory work, which was unbelievable. Just impossible, okay, but we're getting there. That plaza will be there, refurbished, anew, safe, very beautiful for everyone to have. This is my position. I want Israel to be the home, and it is the home of all. I don't care if they're conservative, reform, Orthodox. I don't care if they're completely secular and non-believing. It's the home of every Jew. This is not akin to the system that applies in the United States or in Britain, or for that matter, I don't know, in Venezuela. No, skip that one. Okay. But it is what it is here. This is what we have, a series of slowly evolving arrangements. And the thing that reflects that arrangement is the evolution of the Israeli electorate. That's what does it. So that's as truthful a statement, and I think not only an honest statement, but a positive statement of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we'll continue to do this. Israel is the home of every Jew, period. Period.
Thank you. So I see we're sort of running out of time, but I'd like to ask another question here. You had stated that, because right now we're talking about the big deal. Here in the United States, they're trying to do the big negotiated deal. And I know at Bar-Ilan University in 2009, you had said, I believe you had said, that you were in favor of a two-state solution. Today, now in 2018, how do you look at the peace processes? What do you think the likelihood is, and you know, how are you viewing it?
Well, I believe that the way a potential solution is one in which the Palestinians have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And so Joe Biden asked me, well, what does that mean, Bibi? Yeah, you should clap, of course. It's a good idea. Okay. So Joe Biden, the former Vice President of the United States, came to my office a few years ago when he was the Vice President. And he said, well, Bibi, what are you? Are you for two states or you're not? And I said, Joe, I don't believe in labels. I'm going to tell you substance, okay? The substance is what I just said. They should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And specifically, the first power that we will continue to hold is the power of security in the tiny area west of the Jordan. West of the Jordan, Israel, and Israel alone, will be responsible for security, which means that it's not just a question of hot pursuit going into Palestinian areas, okay? It's also having the ability to be there all the time. That's why the West Bank is not Gaza. We left Gaza, what happened? This tiny thumb, became a position of radical Islam, supported by Iran. They fired 4,000 missiles on us, not only on Beersheba and Ashdod, and Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Kiryat Shmona. Okay? Why is that? Because we're not there. But we are in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank, so nobody builds tunnels. They don't want to. It's just a waste of time. We'll get there. And we keep the peace. Guess who benefits from that? Guess who benefits from that? It's not only us, it's the PA. They'd be overrun in 2 minutes. A couple of years ago, we uncovered a plot of 100 Hamas to overthrow Abu Mazen, kill him, not kill him politically, kill him. So if we weren't there, they'd not be there, which is exactly what happened when we left Gaza. They were there in Gaza. They had 15,000 armed men. Hamas had 3,000 within, 2 days, or a few days, okay, a few weeks. They kicked them out. And we can't afford that happening in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, or any good part of it, which is about 20 times the size of Gaza. And so I said to Joe Biden, and I say this everywhere, and I say it publicly, I said it in the years since Bar Ilan 150,000 times, Israel and Israel alone will have the security responsibility in the area west of the Jordan. And Joe said, but that's not a fully independent state. And I said, okay, it is what it is. You can give it any name you want. State minus, autonomy plus, autonomy plus. It sounds like a rating agency or something. But that's it. That's the truth. And this truth is shared much more widely across the political spectrum in Israel than people understand. Because we're not going to imperil the life of the state, for a label or for an op-ed, a good op-ed for 6 hours, not even in the New York Times. So, nobody's laughing. Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Well, as our last question, as we get ready to leave this GA, where we've been talking candidly and respectfully, what are you the most proud of about Israel today that you want us to think about when we're going home?
I described in a Knesset speech the other day 2 synagogues that I visited recently that made an immense impression on me. My family came from Lithuania and its environs. And a few months ago, I got an invitation for a summit at the Baltic States in Lithuania, in Vilna. Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. So I came there, conscious of the tremendous cultural phenomena that was there. It was called Yerushalayim Delita, Vilna. It had 200 synagogues, and only one was left. The one the Nazis used for something, so they didn't destroy that one. And it's called the Choral Synagogue. And I stood there and I thought, you know, I was thinking about what happened to those Jews. 95% of the Jews of Lithuania, who were just brilliant, brilliant, brilliant people, they were taken outside 10 kilometers outside Vilnius to death pits, and they were just shot, 1,000 at a time. Bodies burned, another 1,000. So they destroyed all of Lithuania. And I thought, here I am coming back there as the leader of a proud and independent Jewish state that would have been unimaginable 75 years ago. Then the second synagogue was in the Golan Heights. We uncovered up to now about 30 synagogues, ancient synagogues in the Golan Heights, because the Jews were there until the 8th century. Even after the destruction of Gamla in the great rebellion against the Romans, the Jews came back and they built. The Galilee was a Jewish, not the Galilee, the Golan, Galilee too, was peopled by Jews. And then there came a big earthquake in the 8th century and destroyed all these synagogues. And the stones were taken away from all the other synagogues for this or that building by the people who followed the Jews. Except in this particular synagogue, the stones were left in place. It was a big pile of stones in the Kshatot synagogue, it's called. And I authorized a project a few years ago, which very able archaeologists came with artificial intelligence, of course, and they took each stone, put it in a computer program, and now they could tell exactly where each stone was there in the original building. We just finished it. It stands exactly as it stood 1,300 years ago. Exactly. It's not a replica, it's not a shihzul restoration. It's a perfect restoration. And I was there and I was thinking about it. If they could see us, because I could hear them praying, I could hear them chanting, I could hear them talking to each other. It's so much alive. And I thought, here's what I would tell them. What I said to the, to the Jews of the Choral Synagogue, and what I say to the Jews in the Golan is, we, your descendants, are back. We're back. We've built this country again. We restored our sovereignty. We built a nation for the Jewish people, all the Jewish people worldwide. We're performing a miracle. This is a rising power in the world. Look at the restorative powers of the Jewish people. It's the life force. That's the thing I'm most proud of. I'm proud that Israel is becoming a global technological power. I'm proud of the fact that we're expanding the circle of peace and normalization, and you will see it. I believe ultimately that is what will drive peace with the Palestinians. You used to say the Palestinians will open the door for the Arab world. I think it may be turning the other way around, and probably will. But there is so much energy here. We have, I've had basically two missions in my life. One is to be the defender of Israel, and the second is to liberate its economy. Look at what happened when we liberated the economy here. There's a lot of seichel here. There's a lot of capacities, the great capacities of the Jewish people, our capacity to create life after death and to be restored in a way that never happened to any other people in the world. Any other people in the world. And I just end with this because it happened last night. It was so, 2 nights ago. I was so moved because the vice president of China came for dinner. And he said, I've been reading books about the Jewish people, and I'm trying to crack the secret. And I said, well, the former president of China, Jiang Zemin, asked me the same question when I came there as a young prime minister 20 years ago. He said, I really admire the Jewish people. So I said, I really admire the Chinese people. And he said, the Jews and the Chinese are two of the oldest civilizations on earth, 4,000 years, they're 5,000 years. I said, yes, that's true. I said, there's one difference, small difference. He said, what's the difference? I said, how many Chinese are there? He said, 1 billion plus, whatever it was. Now, how many Jews? He didn't know. So I said, there are about, at the time, about 12 and a half, 13 million Jews in the world. And, you know, there was shock, silence. That's a small suburb in Beijing, you know. You know, typically they think the number is at least 10 times that. So he said to me, what happened? You know, they've been around 5,000, we're 4,000. I said, a lot of things happened, but it boiled down to one thing. You, the Chinese, kept China, and we, the Jewish people, lost our land. So for the last 2,000 years, what we're trying to do is retrieve our land, and having retrieved it, rebuilt our independence and built our state and our army and our economy to preserve the Jewish future. That's the job. That's what we've accomplished. It never happened in the history of nations, but it's happening here. And you're part of that miracle. And I want to thank you for all your support. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats as the Prime Minister's delegation exits. This concludes the GA. Safe travels home.